Nolan, thanks. If you're planning to travel by air starting this Sunday, you will need to have a real ID or pay a fine to be cleared through TSA at Appleton International Airport. Officials tell us it's estimated 96% of the people traveling through their facility already have a real ID, so they don't expect the policy to have a huge impact. The $45 fine is meant to encourage travelers to meet a higher standard of identity verification, which went into effect earlier this year after nearly 2 decades of delays. This replaces a previous fine of just $18. Other acceptable forms of ID to avoid a fine include a valid passport, tribal ID, and a few other very specific forms of government-issued identification. All of these details are listed on the TSA website.
If you don't have a real ID or another form of identification, you can go through their process. You do have to pay $45, but you make the payment before arriving at the airport, and they give you some paperwork to bring to the checkpoint to be able to get through the checkpoint.
Right now, there's no punishment for those traveling without a real ID other than potential delays to allow for extra security screenings. Congress passed the Real ID Act in 2005 in response to the September 11th terrorist attacks.